Can you hear me? Can you hear me at the back? Yeah, okay, grand. And I'm not going to be using any tech tonight, I'm just going to be speaking. My Twitter bio does say that I'm ex-technophobe, but that's really just because I managed to get onto Twitter. So I've been asked to speak about the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish Government, transport, climate change. Are we going forwards or are we going backwards? What do you think? I'm really pleased to be invited to discuss this because I think it is a topic whose time has come. It's absolutely essential that we start to realise the part that transport emissions have to play in tackling climate change emissions on the whole. And I asked that question in my office today in our Parliament team. You know, Patrick Harvey and I share a couple of cosy little offices down at Holyrood, and I put that question to the group. Are we going backwards or are we going forwards? And you can imagine there were some strong opinions. We discussed the fact that we have trams in Edinburgh now. You know, potentially trams that can be run on purely renewable energy. We thought that was a step forward. We spoke about the fact that we're seeing more, cycle parking space emerging. We thought that was a positive, although sometimes it's not as positive as you like. Probably my local high street at Brunsfield, I can spend a bit of time wandering about trying to find an empty lamppost. We spoke about the fact that the government have just announced an exemplar bike project and funding for that. Something I've been involved in with my colleagues on the cross-party group on cycling, something that we welcome. And we spoke about the fact that you could imagine that things are really going from strength to strength if you live in Edinburgh and you see what's happening on certain roads at certain times. But let's look at what's happening across Scotland as a whole, at the modal share of all journeys nationally. With a huge winning margin, in first place comes the car, at 65%. I'm pleased to report that walking comes next, with a third of that total, some 23%, then the bus, 9%, rail, 2%, and cycling, 1%. So there's a way to go if we're going to reach the government's vision of all bike journeys, 10% of all journeys by bike by 2020. And the price trends that we see aren't encouraging us to change, are they? I mean, we're obviously all committed to cycling. We understand it, we know what the benefits are, we get it. But that isn't something that's been shared nationally. And there are so many opportunities, and that's why I think this is a really important issue to push on. But as I say, the price trends aren't encouraging that change. It is now less expensive to drive. Fuel duty, vehicle excise duty have gone down. On the other hand, it's more expensive to travel by rail or bus. And I was quite surprised when I looked at some of these figures. Rail users have seen real terms price increases of 18%, and bus users a staggering 26% increase. That is really something that we have to challenge. Now, I think this is gravely concerning because those in the lowest income brackets are more reliant on public transport. And they are paying the price of this unwillingness to invest in the many opportunities that walking and cycling bring. And I really think it's important. Public transport should be less expensive than using the car. And what of those 65% of journeys that are taken by car? Well, unfortunately, cars have never had fewer people in them. The average car is travelling with 1.5 people in it. Now, I haven't seen one travelling with 1.5 persons in it, but you get what I'm saying. This is a dreadfully inefficient use of road space. And if, like me, you've lived in Edinburgh, I'm Edinburgh born and bred, I have lived here now for a long time. And I celebrated a very big birthday last month. I'm actually at a National Party conference, but I think things are clearly getting worse. You know, if I'm travelling around the city and I'm on a bus, I'm waiting further back from a junction than I ever have previously. We know that we have air quality management zones in this city, and clearly we're doing better than some, but we could be doing much, much better. And clear that the costs, the real costs of motoring aren't being paid for. The noise pollution, the congestion, the impact on our healths, the road crashes that we see. The costs just simply aren't being accounted for. And I hope as we go forward, Tom's going to be speaking about what's happening in Paris very soon. I hope this really starts a serious discussion about climate change, the part that we can play in addressing our emissions, and, as I've said before, the part that changing our travel habits can have, the really positive impact. Transport has to be included in those discussions because it makes up a quarter of our climate change emissions in Scotland, larger than industry and agriculture. I was quite staggered when I realised that. And this is at a time when our greenhouse gas emissions overall have been declining. But Tom will no doubt comment on this. Transport emissions have not been declining. Well, they've declined by 2%, or a measly 1% if we include aviation and shipping. So perhaps these air quality management zones aren't a surprise. And it really strikes me that it's time for a public outcry on the health outcomes of the way we travel. Because air pollution, which we'll be debating in Parliament tomorrow, I'm pleased to say, is having a major impact on our national health. But there is no public outcry at this invisible killer. Now, it's my view, and I'm not going to get party political about this because I work on a cross-party basis with colleagues who are committed to change, but I do believe the Scottish Government's investment choices are making matters worse. The expenditure on motorways and trunk roads has never been higher, but the expenditure on maintenance of our roads has never been lower. That is a problem, and it's one that we can see and experience as cyclists. I sort of feel often that I'm travelling in what I now refer to as the pothole lane. The side of the road where it's very difficult, it's very challenging. It's challenging for motorists too. But there are lots and lots of projects that we could be investing in on a local level. As I put it to John Swinney, there's lots of shovel-ready potholes out there, just waiting for small local companies to be given the work. If you think about the investment in the other Forth Road Bridge, a lot of that, there's a lot of leakage there in terms of boosting the local economy. There's lots of reasons for that. Crazy procurement contracts, the fact that we don't manufacture enough of what's needed in this country. But if you took that investment and put it into lots and lots of local cycle projects, dealing with our potholes and so on, the economic benefits would be massive. And I think probably part of that is that, well, a lot of politicians like grand schemes. I'm sure the government is, just going to be beside itself when that bridge is ready. And will that other bridge really be kept for public transport and bikes? Well, we'll wait and see. I've had the opportunity to ask, I think it was one of Alex Salmond's last First Minister's questions, if he could guarantee that we wouldn't end up with an 8-lane motorway over the Forth, and I seriously hope we don't, but you can imagine the temptation if there's the tailbacks that there are now, and there's another bridge just sitting there. And it might be the case that public transport and bikes get half of the existing bridge. Anyway, I hope that won't be the case. But I think, there's a real willingness to unveil new things and say, wow, look at this, isn't this fantastic? But we overlook maintenance and we don't invest in the small things that could really transform the way we do things. And it's absolutely clear that what we really need to see are segregated road lanes. We don't need to, the evidence is there. The government has gone on various study tours. They know what will make a difference. They know that cycling is increasing where there's some investment. They know that sometimes it's increasing where there aren't segregated lanes. But I'm sure they know too that it would increase markedly if there were segregated road lanes. And as I say, this exemplar project that's just been announced will be bid for across local authorities. We want to see it on a main arterial route, somewhere that will make a notable difference so that that local authority can say, wow, look at that, we have had a 10% increase in cycle rate since we introduced that infrastructure. Something that will make the government realise this is worth investing in. And then, as an exemplar, an example, I would hope it's something that will continue to see investment. I mean, Transform Scotland have asked that they're another very good campaigning group, and they want to see such a route in all towns and cities, one in each, by 2020. And then they want to see main arterial routes all having such segregated routes by 2030. But clearly that is far too late to meet the government's vision of 10% of all journeys to be by bike by 2020. And I think the fact that the government uses the word vision sort of tells us something about its commitment. We need words like target, or, I just think vision is quite aspirational, isn't it? It sort of kicks things into the long grass, and I'm absolutely certain, unfortunately, that the current rate of progress, we will not be seeing that. We will in Edinburgh, but we won't elsewhere. Now, our First Minister, when she was Deputy First Minister, giving evidence to the Infrastructure Committee, said, "It's worth repeating that we're absolutely committed to that 10% vision, and that I accept that a big factor in this is funding, but that is not the only factor, and there are other things we need to be working on as well." Now, I agree up to a point, but even bikeability training and education and awareness training all take funding. But as First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon has said, "We know that moving to a low-carbon future isn't simply a moral imperative," so she gets it, "it is also a massive economic opportunity. So why do we continue to miss out? We're not investing effectively in cycle tourism, still a bit hit and miss whether you can get your bike onto a train all the time. And I think not having that assurance puts a lot of people off taking their bike to the station in the first place." And sort of travelling, the global travel that I have done has just convinced me of the opportunities that are there. Maybe about 20 years ago, I was in Florida, and I was in a place called Dunedin, and it was really suffering economically. There were lots and lots of boarded up shop fronts. People were sort of in despair, thinking, how can I make a living? What are we going to do? And they introduced a visitor levy, and they took that funding, ring-fenced it, and invested in cycle routes. Now this is really, fabulous thinking, and they developed a whole network called the Pinellas Trail. Well, a few years later, 100% shop occupancy totally transformed the economy, and they realised that one bike parking space could hold several bikes, and all those little shops were thriving. And I did take in this graphic to John Swinney when Patrick Harvey and I were trying to get more money for active travel in the budget, and just pointed out that this isn't only about the environment. It's not just the fact that it'll save you money on public health spend, but it also has economic benefits. And last week I was at the fabulous Walk, Cycle, Vote event, which was held in the city chambers, and there was a woman there who suggested that when she went shopping into her local high street, she's obviously very organised, she had little cards, and we just hand them to them saying, "I came today by bike." And I think that's something we should think about, because then shopkeepers start to make the link, start to see that we're good for business, and maybe we'd get a few more bike parking spaces in streets like Brunsfield. But I think the sort of crux of this for me is fairer funding. If we want to be a socially just, fair society, we have to bear in mind that in some of our communities, 60% of people don't have access to a private car. So why is all the funding going on trunk roads and motorways? That is a really important social justice issue. We know that in cities like Copenhagen, it is the less affluent people who cycle the most. We really do have to address that. And also, in Copenhagen, they've said the reason they cycle more isn't because they're terribly concerned about the climate, although that climate change, that is important. It's because it's convenient, it's because it's fast. I mean, I live in the southwest of the city. If I leave Parliament and I want to know I'll be home in half an hour, the only way I can guarantee that is by bike. So it's really important that we get that across too. But I want to go back to the issue of air pollution, because I think that's a social justice issue. Who is it that finds themselves living next to the most polluted streets? The International Agency for Research on Cancer has announced that it has classified outdoor air pollution as carcinogenic to human beings. And it's shown that more than 90% of people in European cities breathe air which is dangerous to their health. As if we need any more reasons to take action to move the government forward. Do let me know how I'm doing for time. So we know that outdoor air pollution is a leading cause of death. But does our budget silo approach take account of that? If we're building a new road in that community, are we considering how many people will suffer, how many more hospital beds we'll need to take account for that? Someone once said that if we give someone who is overweight bigger trousers, they will simply fill them. Now, the same has been, well, we have the evidence that tells us that this happens. If you build more roads, they simply fill with cars. We can go on and on and on. We can, simply concrete over the entire UK, but it isn't a sensible way forward. But on the subject of air pollution, remarkably, there are only 6 monitoring stations for fine particles across Scotland. Now, a few weeks ago, I visited the British Heart Foundation at the Royal Infirmary, and I was really impressed with the research that's going on there. Professor David Newby, here in Edinburgh, is leading the way, proving links between air pollution and heart disease, one of our biggest killers. And he said that in the 1950s, when there was smog, everyone was aware of it. It was really, really obvious. And the problem used to be that the particles were so big that they stuck in the upper airways. But now, these nanoparticles go straight past. They go deep into the lungs and even into the bloodstream. He's saying,
talking about a professor at Edinburgh University, it's as if you're leading into Dave's talk, so probably another minute or two.
Okay, that's fine, okay. So I just really want to make it clear that we have the evidence, we know the impact on our health of the way our transport system is currently being delivered. It's impacting on our ability to get to work and school sensibly, safely. It's impacting on our health. And it really is impacting on productivity. Businesses are wasting time, congestion is costing them a fortune. I think even the CBI are behind this agenda. But I'm just going to finish with summing up again. Has the government been moving backwards or forwards? Well, I think it's moving forwards because we now have a cross-party group on cycling. I'm pleased to be a part of that. I think it's moving forwards because we see, and this isn't strictly, it's called Pedal on Parliament, but I can't put it down to the Parliament. Possibly they've evolved because of frustration at what's not going on in Parliament, but the fact that grassroots groups like this are grabbing hold of this agenda is absolutely fabulous. Ministers are engaging with this, so I see that as a positive. I think it's going backwards though, because we have never spent more on motorways and trunk roads, never less on maintenance. I think the 2016 party manifestos are absolutely essential, so please continue to lobby the living daylights out of everyone and every party. But I would say when it comes to, we've had discussion in Parliament of issues like presumed liability, which is some progress, but it probably is my feeling, and I really look forward to the discussion later on, that what we're doing just now is standing still. We have the evidence, we hear all the rhetoric, preventative spend, preventative health measures, but we're not grasping the thistle yet. So with regards to moving or backwards or forwards, I'm going to say that at the moment it is my view that we're treading water and we're standing still. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.